Hi, my name is Jonathan Mark of Flyby News. November 22, 2013 marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This is also in the same year as the 100th anniversary of the secret birth of the Federal Reserve System. The impact and the connection of these two world-changing events will become apparent during this film that I call Dark Legacy, JFK and the Fed. John Hankey's film is called Dark Legacy, George Bush and the Murder of John F. Kennedy, and will also be shown at the Greenfield Gardens Cinemas in Massachusetts on November 21st, the day before the anniversary. Bush Sr. was involved in the early days of the CIA. Very few people realize this, and that his father, Prescott Bush, had his funds frozen for financing Nazi Germany during the Second World War. Why do so few people know if we have a free and independent media? William Colby, former CIA director, was quoted as saying, "The Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media." The files on the investigation of President John F. Kennedy's assassination are due to be released in 2017. That is, unless the president delays it further. And don't be surprised. Secrecy, cover-up, manipulation of our minds have been going on for centuries. It is pretty disturbing, and a lot of people are convinced that they don't even want to know the truth. As James A. Garfield said, "The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable." President John F. Kennedy was taking our country in a new direction. This is in stark contrast to the Bush Jr. administration that attacked preemptively on the false suspicion of WMD. The Obama administration has carried on a self-inflicted war on terror, but what is actually becoming wars for terror and destabilization. Without truth, there is no justice, and without justice, there will never be peace. Thank you for watching Dark Legacy, JFK and the Fed.
Now, on June 4th, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, which authorized the US Treasury to start printing a new form of the silver certificate called the United States Note. John F. Kennedy issued $4 billion worth of this new cash money, free of debt, free of interest, and it was enough money to allow the nation to conduct its business without needing to involve the private Federal Reserve Bank. Only 5 months later, John F. Kennedy was shot by the crazed lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
This is the basement floor of the Dallas City Hall, and that's where Oswald has been shot.
And as soon as Kennedy was buried, the United States notes were pulled out of circulation and destroyed, except for samples in the hands of collectors. Now, when I first proposed this linkage between the monetary system and the assassination of our world leaders, I got an email saying, well, that's nonsense. How do you know it wasn't Cuba or the Russians or whatever else? And I'll be the first to admit there were overlapping agendas. There were a lot of people who wanted Kennedy dead for a lot of different reasons, but if there is no link to his U.S. notes, then why was John J. McCloy, former president of the World Bank, former president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, appointed to the Warren Commission? I don't care what kind of a man McCloy was. He is not a homicide investigator, and the Warren Commission was supposed to be investigating the assassination of the President of the United States. What is a bank president doing on the Warren Commission if there is no connection to the United States notes?
Thomas Jefferson wrote, "If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continents their fathers occupied."
See, what the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 did was give this private banking cartel a total monopoly of printing money. So what you had here was a complete takeover of the government of the United States by these private bankers. They've owned it ever since.
100 years after Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln was pondering the same issues when he said, "The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency. Creating and issuing money is the supreme prerogative of government and its greatest creative opportunity. Adopting these principles will save the taxpayers immense sums of interest, and money will cease to be the master and become the servant of humanity."
Every $100 bill which the Federal Reserve System prints and is sold to the United States at full face value represents a $100 loan. Even though the government pays for it, they still pay interest, and it becomes, that's what your $4 trillion debt is, are the Federal Reserve notes.
What do the fears expressed by Jefferson and Lincoln have to do with today's murmurings about something called the New World Order?
And incidentally, it was Woodrow Wilson who first proclaimed the New World Order. It was the creation of the Federal Reserve that put the cap on this whole revolution, because that's what it was. It was a revolution that overthrew the traditional American system, the traditional government of the United States.
There is a controversy raging everywhere in America today. Everywhere, that is, except in our major media. A controversy that goes to the very heart of who we are. Are we citizens of the greatest democracy on the face of the earth? Are we captains of our own fate? Or are we merely pawns in the geopolitical strategies of shadowy international financiers? Financiers that may even control our own Federal Reserve. Do groups like the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Federal Reserve control what happens here in America? Tonight we're going to see some evidence that they might. Tonight we're going to see some evidence that there may just be masters of the universe.
Tonight we will visit the scene of a crime so perfect that for almost 30 years no one knew that it had even taken place. The secret birth of a criminal conspiracy to rob not just one, but each and every bank vault in America, all at the same time. And in between, we've got wars, assassinations, and Martians. In fact, if it weren't for the Martians, you might have heard about this mother of all conspiracies long ago. At precisely 8 p.m. on the evening of October 30th, 1938, the Mercury Radio Network interrupts the music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra for a special news bulletin. A huge flaming object believed to be a meteorite fallen on a farm near Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Moments later comes a correction. It's not a meteorite, no, but incredibly, Martian cylinders falling all over the country. The famous War of the Worlds broadcast has begun.
Welcome to California.
With its terrifyingly real descriptions of an invasion from Mars, and before the night is out, 1 million people will run panicked into the streets. But what has been, for almost 50 years, a closely guarded secret is this. Orson Welles' broadcast was no mere show business stunt. It was an experiment in fear, a psychological warfare test conducted for the Rockefeller Foundation. And when the results were published 2 years later, they were available to only a few well-chosen people. An elite whose very existence is denied in our mainstream media, who, safely hidden behind the curtain of history, may be pulling the strings of our government, our press, and even our Federal Reserve, may indeed be the masters of the universe.
When you wave the white flag, you want to be friends? Hey there! Open up! Come on out! We're friends! Yeah?
The psychological warfare test, which we discovered in Orson Welles' broadcast, is crucial to any understanding of why some people feel that elite institutions like the Federal Reserve, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderbergers pulled the strings that we all dance on.
The people who call conspiracy theorists are not the conspiracy theorists themselves, so to speak. So it's we're talking about facts. We're talking about facts here. The Bilderberg Group does exist. The Federal Reserve does exist. The people who are members of the Bilderberg Group are also the people who do control the Federal Reserve. These are all facts.
If a group can effectively control national governments, multinational corporations, and even our perceptions, they control the world.
But the real founder, I believe, of the Bilderbergers was another man that I met through Jack Hines, C.D. Jackson. And C.D. Jackson was the then publisher of Life magazine. He had been publisher of Fortune some years before. And in between, he, for 4 or 5 years, was the equivalent of being the head of the National Security Council in the White House under Eisenhower. He was the chief of psychological warfare.
It all began here. This is Jekyll Island, just off the coast of Georgia, where the immensely rich industrialist J.P. Morgan established the hotel behind us. Here is where representatives of the great banking houses of the world, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Kuhn Loeb, and House of Morgan, met in secret to establish the Federal Reserve.
The Jekyll Island story is one of the great untold stories of the 20th century. And it was these bankers who got together, left Hoboken in a sealed train with the shades pulled down, and the reporters were going crazy. They knew this was big. These are 5 of the biggest bankers in the world getting on this sealed train. The reporters wanted to know what the hell was going on. They wouldn't talk to them. The train pulled out of the station, left the reporters there, and they didn't know for years what had happened.
It is the urging of the famous poet Ezra Pound that sets Mullins on his lifetime quest for the truth about the origins of the Federal Reserve. In the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., Mullins starts looking for clues.
Ezra Pound's young artists and writers friends were killed during World War I. Ezra wanted to know why they died. Digging book by book, row by row, in the entire economics section of the Library of Congress, I found this little magazine with the Jekyll Island story in it. When I took that to Ezra Pound, he was so thrilled. It was the biggest discovery of his life. He said, "You have uncovered the biggest detective story of the 20th century."
Why does Pound call Mullins' investigation the biggest detective story of the 20th century?
Because I was tracking criminals. This is a criminal conspiracy. The Federal Reserve System, because of the way it originated as a secret conspiracy at Jekyll Island, in law, when any people meet together to plot to rob somebody, that becomes a criminal operation. It can never be anything else. Throughout its subsequent history, it can never overcome that initial criminal beginning. And that's where we are today, a criminal syndicate. That's all it is. It's all it ever has been.
We are back to our initial question. Are we citizens of a great democracy, or is something more sinister at work? Is there anything wrong with the best and the brightest controlling our country?
What's wrong with an elite ordering world events? There's a lot of things wrong with that. The American people, at least, have always been told that they control their own destiny through their elected representatives. But when you find their elected representatives attending secret meetings with some of the wealthiest bankers, industrialists, behind closed doors, surrounded by armed guards who will not let the general public in, and they're making decisions that affect the future of the American people and the people of the world, then there are legitimate questions as to why this elite should be able to dictate things.
Are international financiers in control of our lives? Are they the masters of the universe?
Well, they print the money. I mean, if you could print $1 billion tomorrow, well, you could be a master of the universe. But you can't because they have the monopoly. And as long as they can print the money, as long as they can buy the New York Times, the Washington Post, congressmen, senators, presidents, then you can't compete against them. What have you got to offer?
If you have just a very few people, relatively few people, governing your government, you don't have a democratic government, do you? You've got a secret cabal here who is governing the United States. And not just the United States, but the governments of England and France, Germany, all the European countries, less influence in Japan, but quite a bit there too. And so, you know, what would you call it? It's a conspiracy. What else can you call it? It's a conspiracy against the people of the United States and of the Western world.
Are the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the people in their sphere of influence the masters of the universe? That's an interesting question. Let's put it this way. They want to be the masters of the universe, but there are a lot of people who don't want them to be.
It's only fitting that we end with a quote from the man who started it all, Woodrow Wilson, who, as we have seen, spent his remaining years regretting what he had done. "We are controlled by a small group of dominant men," he said, "the worst ruled and most completely controlled government in the civilized world. Some of the biggest men in the United States are afraid of something," he went on. "They know that there is a power so organized, so subtle, so interlocked, and so complete that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." So, is there a sinister conspiracy in control of our lives? Are there masters of the universe? Democratic societies have always been the crowning glory of human civilization. And in a democracy, the people decide. They don't have their decisions made for them. Masters of the universe? You've seen the evidence. You decide.
Democracy, a government by the people, especially rule of majority. A government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. In the United States, we have a representative democracy. This means that we elect representatives and empower them to make laws which run the country. Each and every election day, we give away our power to these representatives. It's the power to make laws. Lawmaking is the central power of government. It is by making laws that the government acts or reacts. But what if you don't like the laws? We have a democracy, right? Won't my representative act in my best interest? That depends. It depends on whether it's in their interest. Remember, they have the power, and you gave it to them. Is this fair? No, not really. What if you could participate in the process of lawmaking? Only the Congress decides which laws to consider, and only the President can sign them into law. So where does that leave you? Nowhere. You don't have any power, remember? You gave it away on Election Day. What if we could have the same power of lawmaking? 24 states and several other countries allow laws to be passed by initiative. The national initiative is an act and an amendment to the Constitution that allows you to participate in the process of lawmaking. It gives you the same power as the government, the power to make laws. I bet you're thinking, but what if we make a bad law? What if we pass something totally unconstitutional? The Supreme Court is there for just this purpose. We too must abide by the courts, and we are only another leg in the system of checks and balances. But what about Congress and the President? There's no change there. The national initiative does not change the way the representational government works. Laws can still be passed by the government. The national initiative does not replace this process. It adds to it, like adding a third house to Congress. We, the people, will have the same power as the Congress and the President. Is this fair? You decide. You'll have to. because Congress and the President won't do this for you. It's not in their interest. It gives you power. So if Congress isn't going to pass the national initiative into law, and if the President won't sign it, how will the national initiative ever happen? The Constitution was created by the people, and if we created it, we can change it. So it's really that simple. We, the people, vote for the national initiative, and when a majority of Americans say yes, it becomes a part of the Constitution. It couldn't be simpler. So is that fair? You decide. You'll have to, because nobody else will decide this for you. The Democracy Foundation, a non-profit organization, has an undertaking to register your decision. Named after the first Constitutional Convention, which took place in Philadelphia on September 17, 1787. Philadelphia, too, is the Constitutional Convention of the people. On the National Initiative website, you can vote for or against the National Initiative. Sounds easy, doesn't it? After you vote, your vote will be manually verified to ensure accuracy. Still sound easy? It's an immense undertaking, but there's no other way. We hope you visit the National Initiative website and decide for yourself. www.ni4d.us.
Eisenhower warned us that the greatest threat to American security came from
the military-industrial complex.
And Kennedy heard him. And then he called on the world to strengthen the United Nations organization, to help them not just to rein in the military-industrial complex, but to eliminate it completely.
Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames.
You see them running away from the wall, leaving you for dead, statements all in red. It's your money they loved most of all. You trust the men in suits, think they're better than you, then you choose to give your power away. Take a look around, see what that's done. It's made this world we live in today. Modern day Nero, fiddle and play, flames burn even higher. Media play, my emotional strings fan the coals, feed the fire. Ignorance is bliss, the song of the fool. The wise man knows his own mind. The holy war is over when you no longer hate. There's no battle to be fought outside. They all fell down. You could hear the sound of angels crying as they all turned away. You could hear the sound as the angels cried. Of love is the one without the power to wound. Stand alone in the dark. Nothing will help in this dream of being apart. The only light to shine on the path ahead is the love that's inside your heart. Keep your eye that burns within. Darkness will help you understand the pain of those that can see no light. Choose again, I know you can. And I only want the power that makes me appear as nothing in the eyes of you. I only want the peace that no one can take. Let the battle be fought by the fools as they all fell down. You could hear the sound of angels crying as they all turned away. You could hear the sound as the angels cried. Everyone is you, you are all one, no better or worse than the fool. The one voice heard in the presence of love is the one without the power to wound. Stand alone in the dark, nothing will help in the dream of being apart. The only light to shine on the path ahead is the love that's inside your heart. Keep your eye on the small